All right. Hello, everybody. We are live tonight for episode 11 of Grief Let's Talk About It podcast. And tonight we're talking about anticipatory, inhibited, and ambiguous loss. So I want to take a minute before we do get started. Nancy's trying to jump in, so give her a few minutes and we'll let her into the panel and everything. But before we get started and get into the discussion, we did have a colleague that has experienced some unexpected loss. I don't want to put her personal information out there and everything for respect for her and everything. But if we could just take a moment and send her some love and send her some support, let her know that we're here for her and everything. Leave your comments um, in the chat section and everything. But yeah, it's definitely hard when we have to experience those things. And so I just want to make sure that she knows that she's loved and cared for and has that support out there. So to our colleague out there and her family, this is all right. All right. All right. If everybody want to come off mute, we just lost Dee. Hopefully she will be back. Cindy, hopefully she will be back soon and everything. Nancy, how you doing today?
Hi.
All right. All right.
Good to see
I want to take a minute and let everybody introduce themselves and everything. So just take a minute and tell people who you are, what you do, and where you're from.
Nancy, you want me to go first or you want to go?
you. I'm still getting my mic together here.
All right. You want me to go, Tony? I'll go.
Yeah. Go ahead. Go ahead.
My name's Dave Roberts. I'm a licensed master social worker. I'm a retired addictions counselor, bereavement support specialist, an adjunct professor, and co-author of a book with Reverend Patty Farino called When the Psychology Professor Met the Minister, which is in part about the spiritually transformative experience that she guided 7 years after my daughter Janine's transition in 2003. She did that in Long Island. That's among other things. The book covers a lot of other territory, but that's one of the features, one of the things that we talked about especially in the beginning part of the book. And that's me.
All right. Nancy, you want to take a minute and introduce yourself?
Sure. And I just want to say, wow, kudos to you, Dave. That's and journey.
Yes.
So yeah. So I'm Nancy Gordon. Pardon me?
I said thank you.
Oh, yes, of course. I'm a loss and transformational grief expert, and I specialize in anticipatory grief. So I'm looking topic today. And I am also a #1 international bestseller, and the books are coming out. One on anticipatory pet loss and grief called I Miss You Already, Bearing the Unbearable Loss of Your Pet. And I do a lot of my writing and individual sessions with clients and for me. So that's a bit about me.
Well, thank you. I am Tony Lynch. I am the founder of Memories of Us. I am the host of Grief Let's Talk About It podcast and one of the hosts of the Global Grief Conference that's coming up this year. So you guys stay tuned for that as well. And I'm also a grief coach, a men's grief coach. And I'm one of the founders of the Global Grief Network. So you guys will see a lot more of that as well. And I'm really, really excited. I'm always excited to talk about these topics and everything. But I think tonight is one of those nights where it actually touches home for a lot of us, right? When we talk about anticipatory, inhibited grief and ambiguous loss, right? What does that mean? And for the people who are out there watching us right now, if you guys could just take a moment, let us know where you guys are from and everything. And so we can give you guys a shout out. But let's talk about anticipatory grief, right? So people have a good understanding of it. I did get some definitions of it, so we can kind of play into it. So first things first, anticipatory grief is grief that occurs before death. It is common among people facing the eventual death of a loved one or their own death. Most people expect to feel grief after a death, but few are familiar with grief that shows up before a life ends. What does that mean? Well, you've seen people in hospice before.
Mhm.
Kathy's from Denver. Thank you, Kathy. Denver's in the house and everything. So in more sociable terms, how do we view anticipatory grief? I mean, we see the acts of it, right? But a lot of people don't understand that that's what it is. When a person is diagnosed with cancer, a terminal illness, or yourself, right? Um, yeah. Let's dive into that for a little bit.
Okay. Do you want to start, Nancy?
No, you go ahead.
Okay. For me, and I can speak, Tony, from experience of having a daughter who transitioned due to a very rare and aggressive form of connective muscle tissue sarcoma.
Mm,
We, in about a 5 minute discussion with an oncologist that we consulted in Boston, basically they told us that there was no cure for cancer. And essentially the message was that we both got was that unless there's a miracle cure, she was going to die. So I
mm,
was like, right, probably at the time of diagnosis, I was in anticipatory grief. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
anticipating that at some point I was going to be walking a path that as a parent, I never thought I would be walking. And
Mm-hmm.
for me, it was I think that definition was accurate, but I also think there is grief before the actual loss because watching my daughter's spirit, her physicality, um, the essence of her personality just waste away because of the cancer ravaging her body and the
mm,
side effects just from the chemo. I was experiencing the loss of the person that I once knew. The daughter that I once had, she was a shell of herself because the cancer had robbed that. And what a lot of people I think need to understand about anticipatory grief in that sense is that we're grieving twice. We're grieving before the actual person transitions, and then we're grieving after. The other
right.
myth of anticipatory grief for me, and I've talked to some individuals who say, well, doesn't anticipating that somebody is going to die cushion the emotional blow of their actual death? And it doesn't. It prepares
Mm-hmm.
it
Right.
prepares you to take care of the practical things like funeral arrangements, celebration of life arrangements, picking out burial plots if those haven't already been predetermined, but it doesn't prepare you for the emotional impact that occurs when the person actually transitions. And we're
Mm,
still going to go through the same physical, cognitive, emotional, and social changes, whether anticipatory grief is involved or not.
That is very well said, Dave. And it's a really hard experience, and because of all you just described, and that we end up really grieving twice. We that Kubler-Ross, of dinner and et cetera, twice. But it is different. And I really think the value and my hope in educating people about what anticipatory grief really is about and what the opportunities are is that because we do have that window of time where we have choices we can make, the of grieving after they're actually gone go one way or another. Either it's more traumatic or it's more healing.
mm,
Either there's more grief and regret or there's less grief and regret
Mhm.
when they're gone. So that's, to me, that's one of the I really want to uh, help educate about what anticipatory grief is really about and what the value of addressing it is, not just the trauma of it.
Yep.
I was actually in an appointment today with getting my nails done, and I was asking my nail person, and I said something about, she knows what I do, and said something um, about my book, and she says, I don't want to deal with that anticipatory grief. I just want to take each day and treasure each day. And that is actually part of what the benefit of having anticipatory grief is. But she didn't want to go any further with that and didn't want to like fix her cat, who's pretty old right now. And to me, that's missing the boat.
And I think particularly too, where it becomes, I think that's another great point that you made, Nancy, about valuing each day. If the person has a prognosis of 6 months or less, that's where hospice can come in. If the referral to hospice is done early enough, individuals at hospice, the interdisciplinary team, the volunteers can help individuals make their end of life chapter in terms of how do you see your final exit being? What is it that you need to do? What issues do you need to explore spiritually, emotionally, psychologically? What relationships do you need to perhaps put some closure to, make amends with? And that is the benefit of doing that. And the other thing that you mentioned too, you mentioned Kubler-Ross, and this is something in terms of anticipatory grief, I think that we need to look at from the point of the terminally ill person, because Kubler-Ross developed her stages of grief in response, I believe, to giving terminally ill individuals a voice, a vocabulary for their end of life chapter. What we did in this society is extrapolated that and said this is how everybody grieves, which really isn't what grievance stages. But for somebody who was at their end of life chapter, gave them a vocabulary of emotions that they can understand and normalize for each step until they got the eventual acceptance. But and I think that's another important point we're making with anticipatory grief. It's different from the perspective of the survivors, but it's also as well as for the terminally ill person. It's a different perspective.
Right. That's right. She was working many, many decades ago where, I mean, she really, at least got the word grief out of, and dying and death and dying out of the closet. But yeah, I think there were some, constraints that she was in, and the population that she was the actual dying. But yeah, what about the survivors? Yep. Because they're going through all the same experience. It's just not in their own body.
Right. The first time I ever acknowledged that I had experienced anticipatory grief, was my mother. She had a stroke and I had to fly home to her. And when I got there, I had two different things going on. There was people that was saying that, through physical therapy, she may get better and things like that. But of course, all the information wasn't in. And then when the doctor finally came in, he said, she has several other, things going on in her brain. And once these things come together, she's not going to make it, and if she does, she's going to be a vegetable. And so in my mind was like, I was kind of conflicted because I didn't understand it. This is before I got into this work. And so, but in a way, it was like, okay, I know what to expect now. Mm-hmm. It didn't make it easier. No, not at all. But it definitely laid out a plate to where I was able to put things on and digest it in sections, so to speak, and then reflecting back from a time in my life where things were very different, I go, well, there's these times where I watched my friends die, where I held their hands and had to tell them what they needed to hear to make them comfortable as they transition out of life, and a lot of times these things were on the streets. So friends who had been shot and things like that, you don't ever want to freak them out as they go. At least that was my mindset back then. And I was like, I just hold their hand. Hey, man, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. And they take the last breath. And it's like, how do you feel about that? That was my biggest thing. Because it's like you're telling this person something that they want to hear. But in the same sense, is it selfish not to tell them what exactly is going on?
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't say it's selfish. I think the way you responded, Tony, was very kind and being present in the moment. And that was all you had. And whether they were aware that they're dying or not, is in the present moment with you. So I think that was a beautiful response, really.
I've
Yeah,
often struggled with that. I often have struggled with that. Like, should I just told him, like, hey, man, you're about to die,
Mm-hmm.
or, but I don't feel bad about anything that I told him, though. I really don't, because it's like if I was on the receiving end of that end, I wouldn't want somebody to tell me that everything was okay, even though things wasn't. You know,
Right, right.
last thing I want to do is be anxiety ridden or afraid of what's coming next and things like that. But then there's the moral side of me. It's like, hey, you lied to him.
Well, didn't
It's like
really,
how do you balance that?
lie.
Yeah,
I mean, you basically said, in this moment, I'm here with you,
right,
and that's okay.
right.
And I mean, that's, I don't know. What do you think, Dave?
I think, first of all, I think I would agree with Nancy. I mean, you gave the response that needed to be done in the present moment. When
Right.
I work with students who are, most of them are going to be working with children and families, and a lot of them want to work in oncology units with children. And
Mhm.
about 20% of the cases are going to run into a family that's experienced the death of a child due to cancer, due to childhood cancer. What I tell them is that the one thing is, what do I do if somebody asks me if they're going to die? So that's something you ought to talk to the family about first, in terms of, if this question comes up, how do you want me to handle that? Because
Right.
and also with the terminally ill person, you ask them, how do you want us to handle that? With the family, how do you want us to handle it? Some cultures don't, at least one that I know, I know in particular, will not tell the dying person that they're dying, even though that they are. And it's just, so I think it's a matter, each case is individually. I can tell you for a fact, my daughter didn't ask me if she was going to die. She never asked me that question. The closest she came to telling me, without me having to ask her, was the Christmas before she transitioned. We were sitting in our family room by ourselves, and she looked at me and she said, Dad, I did a lot for Christmas this year because I wasn't sure. I'm not sure I'm going to be here next year. And I think she knew she wasn't going to be here next year.
Mhm.
Um, so,
Wow. Well, that's beautiful that she shared that with you, that she was, um, she was facing her own potential mortality.
mhm. Yeah,
Sharing that with you.
yeah. And I think our job at end of life is to for somebody at their bedside, is to be what we need to be for them in the moment,
Right.
and it's just whatever they need at that particular moment to transition. And the way I look at it, Tony, the fact that you transitioned a lot of individuals, I mean, you were privy to probably one of the most intimate moments, is that transition into a new existence. In fact, what Patty told me, or one of the things that helped me shift my perspective, is I always looked at myself as the last person to see Janine die. I witnessed as she took her last breath, and Patty looked at me and she goes, what if you looked at it as if you were the first person to transition her into her new existence?"
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay.
And when she said that to me, that took the moment of death, that gave that some new perspective. Now, I also realize that individuals who have loved ones that die by sudden death don't have the chance to do that. But for, and I don't have the chance to do that.
Mhm.
Um, but for individuals who are at somebody's bedside and they're witnessing their last breath, what if we all looked at it as if we were the last group of individuals to witness their transition into a new life, or to usher them, or witness or usher them into their transition into a new life, a new existence, which is eternal life, depending on what your beliefs are. So that's
Right.
also another way to look at that as well too.
But I think a lot of times when it comes down to anticipatory grief, and understanding, people people don't quite put it together in those moments, right? Because before I understood what it was, when my mother passed away, it was just like I was like, wow, you just took everything away from me.
Yeah.
I was like in victim mode in a sense, because I was like, how you going to take everything away from me? In my mind, that's where it was going. Like, and I just had to watch my mother pass away. So now I have to live with those images, right? Even though I don't regret being there when my mother passed away. I'm glad that I was there. I was determined when I flew in. I told my sister, drop me off at the hospital, And that's where I'm going to be at until she either one comes out or two passes away. And that was before I knew anything that was going on. So I was headstrong about that aspect of it as well. But I didn't quite understand it. I didn't really quite understand it. Like, why would I have to watch my mother pass away? Or my actions, my actions was, I questioned them. Like, did I do the right thing? Should I had given her space and things like that. And again, to this day, I don't have any regrets of being there. I held her hand when she passed away. So for me, and in those moments, in my mind was like, okay, she's going to be gone. So I'm going to have to accept this a lot faster than what I normally would, because I now understand everything that's going on. And I think a lot of people look at it that way as well, like, understand what's going on. Is it easier?
Mm-hmm.
No, it does. And this is just me. It just makes it a little bit easier to accept, because I know what's going on. And if there was anything that could have been done, would have been done.
Mm-hmm.
So in my mind, that's the way that, I played that out of my mind. Like, okay, I can accept this a little bit more. It's not like I woke up one day and found out that she was murdered, so to speak, right? So those are the comparison. And Israel Lose actually came back and said, he wouldn't have been able to handle that, and I get that as well. There's some people who can't, and then those of us, there are some people who really give themselves no choice, so to speak, when it comes down to that.
It's, I think one of the things that strikes me about the different stories that you're both sharing, so many variables in each that really makes a difference in how you experience it and how you handle it.
Right.
So, like you, Tony, when you're holding the hand of someone who'd been shot, that's really traumatic. It's traumatic to watch it. It's traumatic to be there, and it was traumatic for them and traumatic for their, you don't, I just think that's such a special moment to have been there with that person in that last moment that was unexpected, maybe for that person as well as you, and to just be present is so saying. And I like Dave's reframing of that you were the last to see this person, help him go to the next, whatever.
Right.
So yeah, but then when you talk about watching trauma unfold and watching the loss, clear, like with your mom, those are when it's unexpected. I think unexpected loss, it is traumatic in and of itself. It's and there isn't the same amount of time to really respond, maybe as we would if we had more time. But I think the most important thing is to do the best done, and feel like we did the best we could in those moments.
Yeah, I mean, and each loss has its own unique set of challenges. I mean, each cause of death has its own unique issues that you need to deal with. And sudden death is something where there's absolutely no opportunity to do closure to the death, especially if it's sudden, if it's an accident. And I think individuals who lose loved ones have a need to reconstruct those events, to put closure to the event. And we need to support that, I think, as coaches, as clinicians. And then the other thing, in terms of things that were left unsaid, I mean, what if the last thing that they said was in anger? and then that person goes out the door, and then they die they die in that minute. That's the last memory that they're going to have.
Right.
And in fact, I worked with an individual when I was working in addictions, and she was her identical twin. They were both using. Her identical twin died in a car accident, and they had an argument. And she had felt guilty, thinking that she had caused her siblings' death. I said, "Look, unless you did something to purposely sabotage that car, you didn't do anything. It was an accident. It was out of your control." And she goes, "Well, she's been coming to me in my dreams." I said, "Well, what is it like?" She goes, "Well, she tells me she loves me and she forgives me." I said, "There's a message in that. She's telling you that let yourself off the hook. Keep me in your heart. I'm going to be always with you in spirit, and just let yourself off the hook for doing what you thought you did, but you didn't do, because what
Right.
it was an accident. It was just an accident. It was out of anybody's control."
I think one of the hardest parts of grief, and I experienced this with my first dog, my, is that I think it's a natural human response to want to be in control of that loss, and to try and manage it, to try and control it, to try and delay that. I think our mindset is a lot of guilt and regret, as if we did something wrong or could have done something different. When I think, in your point, Dave, most of the situations we assume a certain level of guilt and regret that makes us we were in control of it.
Yep.
Yeah.
We're not in control of it most of the time.
No.
This is true.
Yep, it is true.
This is true. I want to acknowledge some of the people who have came in here. We got Bianca from Miami. We got Kim from Loveland, Colorado. Hey, Loveland, Colorado. And we're in the house up here. We also have they're lighting up the comments over here, which is not a bad thing. We got Miami, Florida in here. So we got a few other people in here. I just wanted to take a moment and acknowledge those people who have tuned in and say thank you. Thank you guys for tuning in for another great discussion. If you guys are just tuning in, we're talking about anticipatory grief. And you guys can go back and watch the recording when it's all said and done, so you guys can get an idea of what we were talking about. And to dovetail off of what you just said, Nancy, I've had a few friends, actually really good friends. One of my best friends, he was killed on his motorcycle. We got Puerto Rico in the house. Hey, we're out there, y'all. But we moved furniture together. This was one of my best friends. We moved furniture together for probably about 6 or 7 years. So we had that bond and everything, and we kind of stayed. He was kind of we was kind of roommating it for a while. And I just remember him telling me one night, he was like, "Oh man, I'm going to go meet my friend at the bar and everything, and and I'll be back later." And later never came, because that was the last conversation I ever had with him. And kind of found out he had taken off from the bar, ran into the back of a semi truck, and decapitated himself. So they found, unfortunately, with the details and everything, they found the top part of his body at the back of the truck, and they found his feet at the beginning of the truck. So whatever happened, he hit the back of the truck with such momentum that it tore him apart. So when I got that, I was like, no, there's no way. I just talked to him, right? Another good friend of mine, he moved to Michigan, and it was a drug overdose. He had smoked so much crack one night that his heart exploded. So I had just talked to him maybe about 4 hours prior to that, and then 8 hours later, here I am, getting a phone call from his girlfriend saying that he had just died. And so all of these unexpected things, and I was like, wow, and it helps me reflect on the conversation I had before then, because I never want to regret a conversation I had with someone,
Yeah.
I always talk to people and I let them know that I care, that I love them, and things like that. Because honestly, life has taught me. I don't know when it's going to be my last conversation with you.
Yeah.
You know, yeah. Go ahead, Nancy.
I think that's one of the greatest values of anticipatory grief, and I talk about it and work with it as transformational grief,
Mhm.
because out of those experiences you just described, you transformed a way of being in the world and being in relationship, changing your value in relationship and how, and conversations, because you learned from the kind of traumatic losses, unexpected, sudden, and really losses. Um, you learn apply that. You don't want to have guilt, regret, and so you're going to behave differently in your present relationships,
Mm.
and not and I that's the beauty of transformational grief. That's the To me, that's the fruit that comes out of such tragedy, of grief and loss, is when you can do that.
Yeah.
It
I mean, I
changed
think,
me a lot. Um, it changed me a lot when I went through 2 years of my mom's cancer. And that was when she was my first major family loss. And that's when I realized myself, wow, we never know what's going to happen. And therefore, we never interact. I regret someone's gone. So go ahead, Dave. Sorry. I just want to
no,
finish.
I was just going to say too, with anticipatory grief, I was just thinking in the context of cancer. I mean, the thing that I think Lance Armstrong mentioned this in his memoir, and he mentioned that when he was told he had cancer, he was sort of two things that went through his head: he's either going to live or he's going to die. And he became a cancer survivor, and they lived strong, rose as a result of his challenges. But I think the other thing, even with anticipatory grief with a terminal illness, even if the prognosis is good and that person survives that, I
Mhm.
think the same type of transformation in our assumptive worldview applies as we would if we were surviving the loss of that loved one. Because when you realize that somebody survived a terminal illness, you realize that every day is precious. And until they get to that 5 year mark, which is
Mhm.
usually 5 years of remission, nothing's a given. And even after that, nothing's a given because cancer can always come back in a different form, and you're dealing with it all over again. So you learn to appreciate the value of each day and to
Yeah.
make each day your best and to look for the positives out of each day, even if it's amidst days that are not so great. So, and
Mm-hmm.
I think that same type of transformation occurs, and it has to. If I mentioned in a blog that I wrote on a 20-year retrospective of grief that I shared with you, Tony, I think, and I posted on Facebook.
You
Uh,
did, yeah.
yep. And I just basically said, I'm not the person I was 20 years ago. And I said, I couldn't be the person if I was 20 years ago, if we're going to get to this point. It required that I needed to transform. I needed to transform my worldview. I needed to adjust to a world that was different. If I didn't, and I could have chosen not to do that. I could have just said, no, I'm not going to do that, after a period of time. But I mean, I, I, I could not have been at this point. I couldn't be talking to you or Nancy or anybody else if I didn't transform my thinking, and my
Right.
world and my view of the world and life and death.
Mhm. So Mr. Lewis commented, Mr. Lewis commented and put something in the comment. He says, so is this considered complicated grief? So yeah. So it's kind of like, what I'm saying, how everything flows into everything else, right? Because your grief does change. It does change by definition,
Yeah,
depending on how you react to it.
yeah.
So is it considered complicated grief?
I think it can be if there's no movement through grief. I
Mm,
think you're going to see more complicated grief, possibly with ambiguous loss, where there's a loss where there's absolutely no closure.
Right.
where you have, let's say, a missing person case or a child that's been kidnapped and they're
Mhm.
presumed dead, but there's no physical remains to verify it. So there's still some of that kind of hope
Mhm.
Right.
that,
Right.
and if they don't, if individuals don't get support from other individuals who've had those type of losses, they were experiencing ambiguous loss, it can be complicated grief. And any grief can be complicated. I think the more traumatic causes of death can lead to more complicated grief if we don't align ourselves with the support and resources necessary to transform it. If you've witnessed a murder or your loved one's murder, suicide, a stigmatized loss such as which suicide would be one that would be stigmatized, and also death due to addiction. So the types of losses I think can also contribute to to the potential for complicated grief if there's no movement through grief, if there's no appropriate resources either through therapy and support to help individuals get through that. I think any grief can become complicated.
Israel, I'm wondering, when you say, is this considered complicated grief, what is the this that you're referring to? I'm not sure that I understand which you're referring to.
Yeah, Israel, if you want, man, comment on that. Let us know what you really. Let us know what you're referring to, and that way we can kind of answer that question as we go along. And if anyone's out there and you have any questions for any of the panel members, or a question in general, please put it down in the chats. We are willing to answer those questions, and everything like that. So yeah, if Israel, if you could just reiterate on what you're talking about, so we can better answer that question for you. Okay. So while we're doing on that, moving forward, inhibited grief, right? And understanding inhibited grief as well. Kind of ties into anticipatory. I kind of feel in a lot of ways. So for those out there who don't understand what inhibited grief is, I did put the definition down here. Um, it is there is some evidence that a person is grieving, but there are less than expected signs of outward mourning. The dictionary defines the word inhibited to consciously or unconsciously suppress or restrain. A lot of people don't understand that as well, right? So we talk about men and things like that. And when we grieve, we're taught to suppress, not express. So that is a strong form, or anyone who has been raised in that environment, without where you where you're not allowed to freely express the way that you feel is inhibited. It means restricted or unseen for the most part. And I've done that before as well. You know, situations from my childhood, growing up. It's like my uncle taught me one of my uncles taught me a long time ago, when you're in war, something happens, you don't have time to look back and reflect on what just happened. You just got to keep moving. And over a period of time, you don't really address it, right? You just keep moving as if nothing has ever happened. Or if something has happened, it's suppressed to the point to where it began to manifest itself in different ways. It's an inward feeling with an outward result, so to speak.
And I think that's a good example of the pathway to complicated grief for that person could end up
Yes,
with, because
yes,
it starts as suppressed and denied and inhibited, and oh, I'm just fine. And even to themselves, probably even more, not even aware.
Mm. Um, Israel, actually, he came back. He goes, like, if it's something you haven't gotten closure with, and or if you haven't been able to forgive yourself or family. That goes back to a lot of that guilt that you feel when something happens, because we often, when and I hate to bring it up, but overdoses or suicides and things like that, it's easier for us to blame ourselves
Yep.
than to look at what actually happened. We could have done something different. We could have did this. We could have did that. Or what if I would have did? The woulda, shoulda, couldas
Yep.
kind of sets in. And that's, believe it or not, it's normal.
Yeah.
it's so normal, but understanding it actually helps with the normalcy of it as well. Is it normal, or is it just a figment of your imagination? And no, I'm not downplaying it whatsoever, because I've been there, done that. Like I had a friend who I had several friends who committed suicide, and it was like the conversations I had with these individuals. Like, once it was all said and done, could I have said something different? Should I have pried a little bit more? Should I have pressed on this person just a little bit more? But I've come to a place to where I did exactly what I needed to do in the time that it was needed me to do it. Because I can't give you something that I don't understand. I can only give you what's inside of me, the feeling that I have. And my feeling is of compassion and empathy, So when you leave me, when we get off the phone and things like that, in my mind, I'm thinking to myself, everything is good. I'll talk to this person the next day or the next day after, right? And so never expect to get that call saying, oh, such and such just took him or her life last night. And it's like, did I say something wrong? Is the biggest thing, or what could I should have done, things like that. So there's a lot of things that can play off into that.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think the would haves and could haves, that's a normal progression that we go through to come to terms with our loss. We have to ask those questions. We've got to verbalize those questions. So it's part of processing, processing what's happened and trying to wrap our heads around it.
Right.
The other thing that I was thinking about inhibited grief. What if there's grief that needs to be expressed but isn't welcome to be expressed? That's the other part of that. When you're looking at disenfranchised grief, when you're looking at things like a newborn or miscarriage loss, where some people in society will look at it as a lost pregnancy but not a lost child. If you take a look at, an individual dies through an overdose of addiction, well, he was just an addict. So, and the individuals around them begin to ask themselves, is this grief okay for me to express? So what if there's grief that wants to be expressed but isn't supported to be expressed? So we also have to look at it from a feeling of disenfranchised grief as well too. That every loss matters, and that we need to really, as again, coaches, as clinicians, make sure that we align those individuals we're working with the proper support. Whether it be suicide support groups, whether it be newborn loss, anything. And that's the other part of that, is the grief that needs to be expressed, wants to be expressed, but isn't supported to be expressed. And then we have to also look at inhibited grief, I think, from disenfranchised grief as well too. I think we have to look at both of those.
And I think pet loss really falls into that category, or
Yeah,
both categories of an inhibited grief and disenfranchised and devalued and misunderstood grief. And yes, and that having conversations like this, because we're helping people understand what grief is really all about, the different kinds of grief, and I'm really grateful that.
Oh, you good? She froze up on us.
Yeah, she did.
Oh, no, she's still there. Okay. Israel actually came back and commented on that. He says sometimes it feels like if he says anything about how he feels about the situation, it wouldn't be acceptable. I say it anyway.
Yep.
Because, just like all grief is individual, right? So no one can tell you how you feel about said situation. It's your feelings and the relationship that you have with that individual. So speak your truth.
Yep.
I think that it's all, to make sure when you say just, I think there's a lot of validity in that and empowering yourself. At the same time, I think it's also important for people to do it, especially if they're not comfortable expressing themselves or having conflict around really vulnerable issues, that they have somebody first maybe to help coach them about it with people that don't want to hear it, or that they don't understand it.
Yeah. And I think the other thing too is sometimes we need to give ourselves permission not to say anything, because it may not either be the time, We may not have the energy. We may not have the emotional wherewithal to want to deal with it. So it's okay to empower ourselves to say now is not the time, but maybe later would be. And to
Yeah.
dovetail off of pet loss, and as somebody who's transitioned 7 pets, most recently my last cat standing, Zoe. One of the things that I guess for me that gets misunderstood about pet loss, when people come back, they don't know what it's like to have a pet. They'll say, "Well, it's just a dog. You can get another dog." Well,
Mm,
like the humans in our lives, our four-legged friends have very much significance in our own lives. I mean, for
yes,
people
yes.
who don't have children, they're like our children. If they're a service dog or an emotional support animal, they lose that part of their independence and they lose that. So a lot of that has to be considered. The other thing, and I tell my students this, if you are doing an assessment of loss on anybody, assess pet loss and see what the connections of those pets were to the humans in your life that you've lost. Because once those pets transition, they may also rekindle feelings of early grief for the losses that were associated with that pet. I mean, I could speak for Janine's 2 cats, Bootsy and Angel, when they both passed, when they both transitioned, especially Bootsy, who was Janine's cat and became mine after Janine
Mhm.
transitioned. When he
Mhm.
transitioned, I lost a big connection to her, but I
Right.
also lost a big connection to me because of what he did to get me to support me as I was working
Right.
through grief. And a lot of individuals need to understand that about pet loss. They need to understand that is just as intense. It's just as valid, and it's just as one that needs to be honored to support me.
Yeah. D just popped back in. So if you want to take a minute, D, introduce yourself to the audience and everything. I saw you coming back in. So I was like, she'll be in and she can jump right back into the conversation. So before now we talking about inhibited grief and it's great conversation. So tell the audience who you are and
Yeah,
yeah.
I was here earlier, but everybody froze up on me. I'm Dee with the Unplugged Grief Ministries, and I have a website, unpluggedgrief.org, and my podcast is the same, Unplugged Grief Ministries. And I really always enjoy coming into these Saturday night panel discussions because, like Dave and probably even like you, Nancy, we come in and not only do we share, but we learn so much from each other by sharing all this information. So, so did you already discuss anticipatory grief?
Well, we kind of having everything flow into everything else,
Okay,
so people get the
okay,
understanding of how all of these grief analogies are kind of tied into one another, but understanding it actually helps in the process of learning how to heal, in
yes,
that process as well. So we're talking about inhibited grief. And so we was just talking about dog loss. Nancy brought that up and everything, and how it dovetails into human
And
loss,
hit.
how important it is, and things like that. Because being someone who has had dogs my whole entire life, except for like maybe the last 18 years, I I prefer the company of my dogs.
yeah,
It's like for the longest time for me, my dogs were my protectors. They were my friends. When I didn't have anything, I knew um I knew I can just be around them and not have to worry about it, because I have a lot of trust issues as well, not like, I guess in a lot of senses, but my dogs they were
your
something that I could
companion.
trust, right? They were my protectors because, when you're a child running up in this world, you can only protect yourself for so much, so we look for things, and I stopped looking for people a long time ago. And so my dogs became my protectors. They became my confidant. Wherever I went, they went with me. And so
Mhm.
for like the last, like I said, 18 years, without having one, it's like I'm having to figure it out. Like I don't have that to lean on anymore. But that's going to change one day.
And
That's
the unconditional love that they come
Yeah,
from.
and so that relationship with my animals was, you know, um, they were my family. They were all I had. They were definitely all I had. So I understand, when the person loses it, loses a part of their family, like a pet or something. I understand that relationship. Almost, when my son passed away, I didn't have any understanding of it. It took me a little bit to figure it out, and not take things personally. But yeah, when my son passed away, it was like, how are you going to compare you losing an animal to me losing my child?
You don't.
I get it now. Well, no, well, actually, you know what?
No.
You have to back up a little bit. You have to back up a little bit, because just because we on the outside looking in see this just as a pet, the person who has that pet looks at this pet as a family member, because they care for it. You know what I'm saying? They take care of it. All of those things. You got to understand. People have animals for companions.
What I mean by that, though, Tony, is that most people who've had, let's say, like most of us here who've had child loss, to me, whether your pet was the only member of your family, you had no other children, no other family members, that was your family member. To
Mhm,
me, we still need to respect that person for their loss,
mhm.
no matter what. But there are a lot of other people who, unlike us, don't see it that way. And they
Right,
go into a rage when people start comparing animals to humans.
right.
And they choose not to see it no other way. And I'm constantly saying it is still their loss.
Mhm.
You still have to respect them for their pain, their loss. And I
Right.
understand that our humans are different than an animal, but we still have to understand that everybody's loss is different.
Yeah.
So we can't really compare, because I know my loss with Timothy was terrible. But actually, the day he died, I didn't go into a rage of screaming and crying because it was expected. But when
Mhm.
I lost Candy, that was a total different story. I went I went crazy because of how she died. And it took me days to get over Candy's, um, Lizzie's mama, how she died. And it was like the PTSD that just jumped in because it was a painful experience. But I still can't compare Candy's death to Timothy's death. But still, it was my loss. Either way, it was
Yeah.
still my loss. And people should still respect me and my loss, even if they did not understand it. I hope that made sense.
No, that makes perfect sense.
No,
And I just
because
want to add to that as well. Respecting each other's and their losses, having an understanding of what the loss meant to that person. So, I mean, I
and
may
that's
see
the
it one way,
thing.
you may see it another way, but all in all, I'm still going to respect that. You know what I'm saying? As far
Yeah,
as comparison, it depends on the individual that you're talking to. Because I know people who have pets and everything because they can't have children, and those pets
yeah,
become their children, things
yes,
like that. So who am I to tell them that they can't feel a certain way just because, what I'm saying, it's a pet?
yes, I
I
agree.
say I respect that. You know what I'm saying? Whether if you say that pet is your family member, or if it's just or if you feel that it's just an animal. I am not here to tell you to go against anything that you believe. I want to respect that, be in that moment with you, and things like that. Because if I have to be in that moment with you, I want to look at it the same way that I would compare my losses.
Yes,
You know what I'm
that's
saying? I don't want to look at the loss of a person less than the loss of their pet,
right.
because I don't
And
know how they feel. I don't know how they feel. And so
Right.
therefore I'm not trying to add to it. I'm not trying to say, well, it's not a void because it was your goldfish. I'm not going to do that. I don't know what sort of relationship we had that goldfish. I
So
don't.
it's not our place to judge
Yeah, it's not our place
how
to judge.
people grieve.
It's not our place to advise people that this is the way that you should feel because of the situation that you're in or the person or animal that was lost.
yeah.
Remember, you said a key word. These are your losses.
Yes.
These are your losses. So whatever you feel is validated.
Yes.
I
And
am
we have,
not, yeah, I'm not in any position to tell you anything differently. That's not my job.
But you'd be surprised how many people are out there are very judgmental of people who've lost
And that's
pets.
fine.
And
Hey,
I'm like,
I think that one way around this whole conversation that you're bringing up is to give the message that it's possible, or even just ask the question for people who are having trouble understanding people's lives is really more a reflection about them not feeling heard and their grief not really addressed.
yes.
And,
okay, yeah.
and rather than try to convince them of, who's right or who's wrong, or that, I mean,
Right. Yes.
educate people on the valuing, the reason that we need to express and resolve, and that there's all different kinds of griefs and grief journeys, and every person is different, and even the same loss, even a different loss with the same person is experienced differently. It's a different journey. Where I would go with those conversations is understand where they're not, what's behind them wanting to be right or be more, that their pain is more valued.
I think as grief coaches, as clinicians, as bereavement support specialists, we need to meet people where their worst loss is. Just because my worst loss was the loss of a child doesn't mean I can't meet you somewhere else.
Right.
And we need to be companions to each other. I mean, I need to tell, if I was working with Tony, wherever your worst loss is, I'm willing to walk down that path with you. I'm not going to walk for you, but I'm willing to walk it with you. And you just let your story unfold, and I'll do what I need to do to support it, to understand it, to understand through your eyes the relationship that you lost, whether it's a pet, whether it's it's another relative. We are ethically, we need to meet people at their worst loss. And I think Dee and everybody else, right? We don't compare losses. We meet people where they want to be met and what their worst loss is in that moment.
I'm a firm believer, whenever someone comes, if you're in this grief field, whether if it's mental health, whether it's trauma recovery, with, bereavement and things like that, our main duty is to meet you in the mud where you are. If you call me and saying that you're drowning with thoughts of suicide, well, I'm coming and drown with you. You know what I'm saying? Eventually, I got a life. I got a life jacket. You know what I'm saying? So I'm coming prepared with some tools. You know what I'm saying? So coming from an area where I do suffer with that, I understand that, I need someone that has a life jacket, because if I get out there in the water too deep, you know what I'm saying, and I feel that I can't swim, I would like somebody to come in and go, hey, I see you. I can't put you on a life raft, but I got one for you. So, you know what I'm saying, it's at your disposal. So when we look at it in that aspect, I compare it to that thing there, wherever you are, no matter where you are, I'm coming to meet you in the mud, because if I'm meeting you in the mud, I know that you're not in there by yourself.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? And if I will walk with you, I can't walk it for you. That's the one thing I did, like Dave said, I cannot walk it for you. But what I can do is that along the way, since I have walked this path, I can leave some things out for you to grab as we take this journey together. Because the last thing I ever want you to do is to feel anything like I felt. I never wanted people to feel like they have to do it alone. That is a hard place to be when you feel like there's nothing out there for you, or nobody out there that understands what you're going through. So that's my commitment to it. I never want anybody to feel like as if they're alone walking this journey, because you're not. You look at this panel that we have up here. We've all experienced some, major losses and things like that, and all had to come to the conclusion that we couldn't do it alone, right? So we talk about those losses, pet loss, family members, things like that. Respect the person, being present in it, like Nancy said earlier, be present in a moment with them. And like Dave said as well, and walk with them. support them, show them that that they're not by themselves, things like that. Anybody want to dovetail off of that before we go into our next discussion?
No, I
True.
think I'm good.
All right.
Mhm.
So this is one I think all of us can relate to it. And for those who are tuning in right now, if you don't know what it is, I'm definitely going to give you a definition of it as well to help you better understand the talk that's going to come behind it. Ambiguous loss, right? And the definition that they gave me, it was so crazy that this was the simplest one that they gave me. It says, in the simplest sense, ambiguous loss refers to loss without closure. I think we all can understand that and can relate to that in so many ways. And today, the term has never been more relevant, especially as we continue through with many ways the COVID-19 pandemic has upended our lives. Right. So I love the way that they threw that one in there. And that's the reason why I printed that out as well, because it kind of ties into what we're going through in present day. Right. Ambiguous loss, loss without closure. I can relate to that. When my son passed away, he passed away from unknown causes. And so for the last going on 7 years now, I don't know what happened. I really don't. My son got sick one day, and for almost 3 days, watching him be sick, I now realize I was watching my son die until it came to the final moment when he did pass away, and I happened to be there. But to this day, I couldn't tell you what happened. And so and for those of us who have that experience, it's like an open wound. It's like it never closes, because in the back of my mind, no matter how much work I do to make me feel good, and at the end of the day, it's just like, what happened?
Mhm.
7 years have come by. What has happened? What happened? I can assume and things like that, but in all actuality, I have nobody to get mad at. I got nobody to point the finger at. It's just like, how does this happen? How does a healthy 8-year-old kid up and just passes away for no reason? And no one has any explanations for me. So, for me, it's like, okay, I have that open wound. So I am in a constant state of,
Shock.
well, no, numbness.
Yeah.
Like there's an empty part in me, and some days the empty part is bigger than me, and some days it's small enough to where I can manage it. Um, but it's still there. It's definitely still there. And maybe one day I will have those answers. Maybe not. But I've had to come to terms with it as well. Like, I may never get these answers. I may pass away and not know what happened. You
And
know. But then there's a part of me that goes, what if I found out? Um, what if I found out and I just take it in a different way?
Well, I don't know if you know this. I don't know. Maybe I shouldn't say it here.
No, go ahead. Go ahead. This platform is free for us to be able to speak. So, but and also educate as well. So,
Well, like with Timothy, of course, he had the Duchenne muscular dystrophy, so we knew with that disease there was no cure, and that eventually he was going to pass away. But the last week of his life, especially the last few days, um, the more IV fluid they were putting in him, he thought his arm was broken when really it was the what, what's the other term for it? He he had so much fluid in his body. He thought his arm got broken by one of the X-ray techs, when actually it was from all that extra fluid crushing his bones.
mm,
And then pretty soon he couldn't hear anymore. He couldn't see anymore. He couldn't even swallow anymore, even if he was already on a vent. Um, from just my little memory, of what I remember it to be at and what happened. All that I think, honestly, some people may call me crazy. I believe they drowned my son and the amount of IV they gave him. And I know I can take his death certificate to the medical records, get the medical records for that week, and read it and find out. But then there's that part of me is so because I know how to read medical records, especially when I used to do medical billing and collections. I am so afraid of what I'm going to read.
Mm.
So here it is now 9 years, and I still haven't gone. And I'm just afraid what I'm going to read, that I'm going to either be right or I could be wrong. But I'm afraid I'm going to be right because I was not the only person who observed that. There were some people that I knew that were in the medical field that also observed that. So that's what my fear is, because if I have validation from other people that they gave him too much IV, even if they knew he was going to die, why are they still putting all this IV in him? You know? So it's just that little thing that just keeps, that I keep in the back of my head. Just go get it, read it, get it over with, instead of just letting it just tingle over you like you're looking for a piece of meat to eat, you know?
Right.
Just go and do it and get it over with. But even after he passed, because, if you know how to read the vital signs and all that stuff, I still, in a sense, had that going through my head, something's not right. But I couldn't afford to have an autopsy report done.
I guess my question would be, what if you read the report, found out that you was right? Would it change your interpretation of the situation? Like, would it bring you peace or and closure, or would it change your mentality of someone has to pay for this? Like,
Well,
so,
I would definitely take it to the DA. And the reason why, the doctor that was on duty that was ordering all this was the same doctor a year or two before that told him he needs to go home and die and not come back.
mm, oh.
So
See,
I'm
that
so
that comment right there, that comment
there's
went,
that thing. Yes,
yeah,
I'm hearing what you're saying. That's why it's this flip flop thing that I'm afraid to find out, but at the same time, I need to. So would that be that can't? I know it can't be medical malpractice anymore because that's already gone out the window. But
right.
would the doctor be responsible for my son's death?
But
And would anything be done about it? You
that's
know?
irresponsible for a doctor to say something like that to anyone when you
Oh,
can
honey,
sit
you
there
don't
and
know
tell
how mad I
patients,
got.
you
You
know,
don't know how
go
mad
home
I
and just
got.
die. Like, where have we come in our years where our doctors just have,
No compassion.
I mean, I get it to a certain extent. Well, actually, no, I'm not even gonna claim that I get it to a certain extent. To me, that is, you
But
don't
I
tell
think,
someone who's about to go through something like that to tell their child to go home and
oh,
die.
you have no idea. I didn't care. I did not care we were in ICU. I walked out screaming and yelling at him. And actually, Timothy's um the lung doctor, pulmonologist, was standing right there, and he was like shocked to hear what I was saying. You don't tell a patient to go home and die and not to come back. That's not your job to play God. God decides when he goes. And fortunately, Timothy lived 2 years more longer than he expected, but that wasn't his place to play God. Um,
Nancy looks like she wants to dovetail off of what you just said. Go ahead, Nancy.
Well, I'm just wondering about where to go with this,
I want closure.
and I guess my question is this an example for you of ambiguous grief, and you're trying to figure out how to resolve it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I want closure because I don't think there's anything that even the DA would do nothing. So if I can just have closure, I mean, I'm at peace because I know that was his time. You know, that part doesn't bother me because we knew eventually the disease was gonna take him anyway. So that's I'm at peace at that part. I'm just what I'm not at peace at is how it happened.
Mm.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, you want closure to the event, not the life. Obviously, you want closure
Yes.
to the event. You want to
Yes.
answer in terms of why what happened happened.
Yes.
That makes sense. Dave, you want to dovetail off of this?
Yeah, I think one of the things I think it's important for anybody with that type of loss, sudden death, or just a medical or suspected medical error that they try to get access if there's an autopsy done to an autopsy report, anything. And if they're not comfortable doing it by themselves, they can take a friend with them, somebody they support that they can go look at the results together. That's the other part is to get that type of support as well too. So, I mean, I think it's important. The other thing is that, again, when you get the results, what will you do with it? And the other thing is if you get no really clear cut answers, are you willing to live with some, and no pun intended, ambiguity? Um,
Right, right.
you're willing to live with some unanswered questions and willing to re-engage in life anyway. And that's the other question to ask yourself. You don't get the answers you want. Well, can you be okay with some gray area, some ambiguity, and just move on? And the other thing I was thinking of when you were asking what did have made a difference, I think of individuals who, and I talked to individuals whose loved ones have been murdered, and
Mm.
they are focused on getting justice for their loved ones, and and then it's like they got 25 years to life, and then they come back, and after all is said and done, they look at me and they'll tell me, they said, I'm glad I got 25 to life, but it still doesn't change what I have to deal with. It still doesn't
Yeah.
bring my
Yeah.
life back.
Right.
So
Yeah.
those are the kind of the things that I've heard individuals grapple with, and that I would grapple with if I wanted to find closure to an event that was due to an unknown medical cause.
Mm.
And
If you didn't get the answers you want, could you live with that? And could you move on forward anyway?
I think those are really good questions, Dave. And to me, it just illustrates this is not the kind of problem solving a person can do on their own. That the complicated grief and ambiguous grief and the need for closure is really made so much less traumatic if you have someone that you're working with who can help you ask like a lot of the questions, help you walk through this. I think it's really important for people in those experiences to get help.
Yeah. We got a Facebook user that just put up here: the piece of closure may have to be found within putting yourself in the closure of the situation and focus on honoring your son. And I totally agree. I have come to terms, and I think a lot of us have come to terms that we may not get those answers. And I have to be okay with that. Does it suck? Yeah, it does suck, because I would love to know what happened to my son, you know. But then there's a side that goes, you know what? I may never get those. I may never get that answer. I may never get it.
That's the way I've been thinking too. Maybe I made the medical
Yeah, I had to find peace with all of that.
just okay.
I had to come to a place of acceptance that yes, this
Yes.
thing has happened. My world has changed.
Yes.
Um, and I have to be at peace with the situation and understand that I may never, I may never get it. I may never
Yes.
get it.
And
And
that's really something that's, I think, general. There are many things that we experience, all different kinds of losses or tragedies that we never get to know really why something happened the way it did.
yeah,
And that I think that is also part of life about like you didn't use the word surrender. That's what we're talking about, is accept what was and surrender to that and find and let go, and then do whatever forgiveness work you have to do that may be involved in letting it go, is maybe becomes more the focus to help you move on.
Yeah. I mean, not everybody is as fortunate as we are, though. You know, this thing that we've gone through has put us in a position to where we can serve others. You
Right.
know, and so when I say that I've come to peace, I found the thing that I was supposed to do throughout all of those things. And honestly, I am dedicated to serving my fellow men out there, because I know the women are taken care of. There's resources out there. I'm dedicated to helping those men just like myself find a place of acceptance and peace, and brotherhood, you know, connection and things like that. So I've just traded the uncertainty, the unknown, for something that I can see.
Mm-hmm.
You know, my peace comes through servitude, and I enjoy watching people heal. I enjoy walking with them through their darkest moments. That's what brings me joy. You know, that's what brings me joy. Not everybody's the same way. So I always tell people, if you're having a hard time, go do some things that you used to do with your loved one, that you enjoy doing. Whether if it's swinging on a swing, climbing a tree, maybe getting some go karts and things like that. Don't hurt yourself, though. You know, and if you do, don't hurt yourself too bad. You know, it's okay to fly out the golf cart or the go kart or whatever. You know, it's okay to get tackled in football. All those things. It's not okay to self-destruct. It's not okay to be self-destructive. And for those who are on that path, they know exactly what I mean. We don't have to go into details about that. Not having closure does not mean the end of the world.
And you know, I could have had a lot of anger towards that day too. But I said, okay, God, you know, whatever you have planned for my life, for the rest of my life, I'm going to have to just put it in your hands, because now I'm all alone for the first time in 25 years. And at that time, I was still dealing with my first cancer, and I still had an open wound. So it was really hard to to think of anything else, you know.
Right.
No legal stuff or nothing. I was about ready to become homeless. I was about ready to lose my pets as well. You know, there was a lot of things that were going on at the same time when Timothy passed away. So thinking about anything legal was just totally out of my head,
Right.
because I was trying to survive just on my own, you know, not just as a survivor of someone that passed away, but as a survived to survive, you know, in this little piece of land. But once I put it in God's hands, things started to fall in place, you know. So I'm just thankful that sometimes He puts people in our lives for a reason, to teach us, to help us move forward, to bring that positiveness into our lives, and then we can move forward. I mean, I would not be where I am right now if I had not had Timothy in my life for the first, you know, the last 20, well, it's not 30 years, but
Yeah.
I'm thankful. You know, I do have peace at it, but still, you always have that little question mark sitting back there. What if, you know?
Well, yeah, I think we always have question marks, and I think anybody who has had to deal with loss without closure, I think we always will have those question marks, right? It may seem good on the outside, but
Yeah.
the crazy part about it is that it does eventually manifest itself. It eventually comes out, you know, in little things that you do that you may not pay attention to. You know, it could be the smart remarks that you give people that you never did before.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? It can be um, it can be just not wanting to be around anyone. You know, it could be just, you know what I'm saying, wanting to go out and drink or do drugs all the time. It can be any of those things. So, but your habits do change. Your habits
Yes.
do change depending on how your grief is manifesting.
Yes.
And certainly grief that isn't expressed can come out in a lot of physical concerns, a lot of irritability, a lot of anger, a lot of self-destructive behavior as well too. That can all get rechanneled, which is why it's important that it be expressed. You know,
Right.
the other thing that I have two thoughts, Tony, before I forget them. You know, all the questions that we've been asking regarding ambiguous loss and the questions that we need to ask to achieve closure to the cause of death or to the event, that's part of the cognitive work that makes grief so tiring.
Right.
Um,
Yes.
to the physical exhaustion that we experience, which is why if anybody buys into the linear concept of grief that we should be done grieving in a year, that by itself,
Hmm.
the 3 to 5 years that I think it may take for us to get to a point of acceptance. And it's different for everybody, obviously, but I'm just throwing 3 to 5 as a time frame. It's different for everybody. I mean, you can't put a time frame on when you're going to get from the raw pain of grief to re-engage in life again. I mean, you know, everybody's going to move at their own pace, and as long as there's movement, that's all we need to be concerned with. And you know, none of us got here overnight. It
No.
took me years to get to the point. You know, it took me 3 years probably to begin to commit to service, and you know, several other years, and particularly after I met Patty to understand to get a new perspective on grief that helped me transform my whole perspective. It helped me
Right. Right.
find
Yeah.
peace. That was so it's going to take as long as it takes, as long as we're willing to be open to any type of new perspectives that can help us. Time is relative. Time is not
Mhm.
linear. That it's going to take as long as it takes, and there's no set time frame.
Yeah. That's very true. You know, have no expectations. Take as long as you need. I've had to learn that because I did try to rush the process. You know, I want to be in a place to where this is not my main focus, but I didn't understand the depthness of the loss, right? You know, because in my mind it was like I'm not going to get whipped by this world anymore. You
Right.
know, this world will not stop me, so to speak. You know what I'm saying? The stubborn, resilient guy, you know, like you're not going to whoop me. How wrong I was. I was very, very wrong. That thing came back and took me apart. It had me strung up and just it laid everything out. It said, this is what's going on, this is who you are, what we're going to do. And I was just like, no, you know, it's like, no, I don't want to deal with it, you know. And then over a period of time, I began to place myself back together, you know, because I learned that there was a lot of things that I couldn't carry with me anymore that didn't hold, that had no place, things like that, things that I thought that, you know, I needed. And then it redefined my life. It redefined who I was as I put those things back together. Even without the closure, it brought me to where I am today,
Mm-hmm.
you know, through a whole lot of work, a whole lot of hard work and stuff, a whole lot of understanding, a whole lot of patience and forgiveness, not just for the people around me, but for people, for myself, a lot of forgiveness for myself, you know, and a lot of just saying this has no place in my life anymore. So I had to let go of a lot of things as well, things that I thought that I needed to protect myself. And then I realized that they were just there, you know. I realized that you know, life will provide me what I need throughout the process of becoming. And throughout the losses, I just began to take them on as my teachers. You know, my losses were my biggest teachers. It was like, this is what I'm going to teach you. Okay, so I became a student. Not everybody's the same, um, but for most people, it can become a great mentor for you. Your loss, and the things that you go to can become a great mentor for you if you allow it to be.
Yeah.
I've always said within every great student is a teacher, and with the great teacher, with every great teacher, there's a student. There's a great student waiting to come out.
Hmm.
You know, that's you know, we need to be able to learn from each other, and I'm still learning.
Oh,
That's
so
what we're
if we're not learning, what that means that we've come to the end of our life, man. You know,
man.
you got to constantly be learning down this road and everything like that. Nancy, you want to dovetail off of that?
I think, it's transformational grief is, really a big passionate part of my work. And that's what you're describing. It's like
Mhm.
growing from grief.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So yeah,
Yes,
it's a really powerful part of life. And the more that we embrace it, and by embracing it, we get educated and understand it. And the more compassionate beings we become, the more loving beings in the world. That's how I.
Mhm. I got one question before, and this is for all of us. How with transformational grief, how has it how has it defined your grieving process? Now understanding it. Because I think a lot of people don't understand that grief does because with transformational grief, it takes things away from you. Most of us fight it, right? Because we're creatures of habit, right? So we go back to what we know. We don't want to transform and things like that. So how has it changed you? How has it put you in a situation to where the process has benefited not only you but those around you?
Well, I can give you an example in my own journey with pet loss. My two service dogs, um, to, as I call it, lift 9 months of each other. I learned a lot about surrender.
Mm,
Um, the 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 side of surrender that's about accepting what is, and the side of surrender that's about letting go. And
okay.
that is one of my 7 is part of my methodology of how I got through my own tragedies of car accident and um, chronic illness and disability, and then eventually losing, facing losing both of my dogs and letting go. It surrender about throughout this session is a really powerful practice. And it's a
Mm,
really powerful way that my losses have transformed how I live in the world. And that had a lot to do with, for me, as I mentioned earlier, referencing a lot of us really want to be lost and not experience it.
mm.
And the surrender is the opposite of that. So that's I can say as an example of probably one of the most powerful transformational experiences I've had with my own grief journeys.
Okay. D, what about you?
I don't know what to say.
And that's fine. They're like it's a lot to think about, right? Because we bring up those things. We're normalizing the talk around grief and trauma and all of those things. So, it's normal to not have the answers, right? You know what I'm saying? Like just because we have the answers doesn't mean that they're right. It just means that they're from our perspective. So we opened up the doors to for people to explore those options. You know what I'm saying? So, it's okay not to have all the answers. Those will come later on. And if they don't, that's okay too. We
Mm.
can put those things, we can put certain things into place to help support it, to help you help you in that grief journey. So, just because we work in this field doesn't mean that we have all the answers either.
And
We
also,
look,
I've never heard that term being used either.
right,
So
right.
that's how I'm trying to
That
Something
well,
like
you know, we're gonna have many more, so we'll be able to. For those who don't understand the terminology, we are going to be diving deep into it as we keep moving forward. So, if you guys have any questions, any topics that you would like us to discuss and things like that, by all means, put those in the comments, and we will do panel discussions behind them. Dave, you want to dovetail off of that?
I think that's a very multifaceted question because there's a different roads to transformation.
Mm-hmm.
For me, the transformational process began when I had to take a look at my assumptive world and look at how it was built prior to my daughter's death, and then take a look at what needed to change, what beliefs needed to be modified, what beliefs needed to go away, which beliefs needed to to be included. And then the whole process of, for me, transformation was about belief expansion. And again, I know I'm going back to the transformational experience I had Long Island with Patty, but she encouraged me to take a look at different spiritual practices that I could integrate with my science-based background. And that was the basis of our future discussions after the initial weekend that we had in Long Island. That where I stayed at her house and the whole journey began. With her guidance, and it's just a matter of rebuilding your assumptive world, and in doing so, transforming how you choose to see the world. And also determine how you're going to reinvest and re-engage in a world without the physical presence of your loved ones. And I
Right.
think
yeah.
and it's an ongoing process, and that transformational process will continue until I transition. I'll continue to pick up new things that'll change my perspective. And as long as we realize that it's a fluid and not a static process, it's all going to be good, and it's
That's
ongoing.
Very, very true. Well, we are at our time today. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in and definitely engaging with us. We do this every 2 weeks, so in the next 2 weeks, we got another one coming up as well. I don't want to give away the title. I think it's going to be another deep conversation, very educational. And with that being said, I would like my colleagues to come out and let everybody know where you can find them, and what they got coming up. So, anybody want to go first? D.
Yeah, I can.
Did you say Dave or did you say D?
Oh, either which way.
Go ahead.
I thought I heard D, and then I heard Dave speaking. I was like, so I'm D with Unplugged Grief Ministries. You can also find me at my website, unpluggedgrief.org, and my podcasts. I'm on YouTube and as well as Anchor, Unplugged Grief Ministries there as well. Unfortunately, at this time, I still don't have a book, but I'm working on writing my book, which I'm excited about. I just need to sit down and keep plugging at it. But one thing I do want to say real quick, Tony, if that's okay, because I know we didn't bring it up, and perhaps maybe in the near future we'll bring it up, the anticipatory grief, because that's also a class that I teach. I have a workshop that's coming up in a couple of weeks on helping children grieve as well, with a few people that's going to be joining in with me, and that will be on March 18th from 10 till supposed to be till 4, but it might be done sooner. And I'm looking forward to when we really get going on our Global Grief Conference. There's going to be so many of us that's going to have, hopefully, the anticipatory grief class. Somebody, if not, I'll do that one as well. It is really important for us to understand what it is and how to embrace it as well. A lot of people, I deal with a lot of the muscular dystrophy community, especially the new parents whose children are just being diagnosed with the illness, and it's really hard for many of them to understand what it is and what they have to deal with. And I do believe I have that talk on my podcast as well. So it's in one of my earlier ones. So that's it.
Nancy?
You can reach me through my website. There's a contact me page, and there's also a called What is Grief? enter your mail address and name, and learn about all the things that I have coming up. And my website is nancygordonglobal.com. Nancygordonglobal.com. And you can also check out my link tree. There's past interviews on that, and ways to work with me. And that tree is NKE dot or linktr.ee/Nancy Gordon Global.
Awesome.
So Linktree, Nancy Gordon Global.
All right. Dave?
You can reach me through psychologyprofessorandminister.com. That's the website devoted to the book. We have a contact page which has my email address. You can reach me on Facebook, in LinkedIn. My son has dubbed me the world's oldest millennial. I always say that because I'm on social media quite a bit, and I try to keep everybody abreast of what I do on social media through the friends I have there. What I got coming up is, obviously I'll be doing some workshops for the Global Grief Conference in April, which I'm excited about. And I'm in the process of putting together my own podcast, and I'll keep everybody posted.
Yes.
It's just, I'm hoping to launch it by the end of March. We'll see how that goes. I got to figure out a few technical, but I think I understood what I might have done wrong earlier. So I'll just have to figure it out and get through it. But I've already told Tony, and I've told a couple other people. So Tony's going to be on my butt until I get this off the ground.
You already know.
Yeah, you already know you're going to be on my butt.
You already know, man.
So and that's something that I'm excited about. So, and I'll keep everybody posted when we're ready to launch. So, and that's it. That's all I got for now.
All right. And I am Tony Lynch. I am the host of this wonderful podcast. We also share stories of loss and grief, individual stories of loss and grief. So you guys, if you haven't checked out the YouTube channel, go over and check it out. Grief, Let's Talk About It podcast. Hit that bell notification so you're always notified when something is. So when we go live or whenever we post a new podcast or events that we have come on. So support the channel that way. Let us know what you think. Also, I'm one of the founders of the Global Grief Network. These members that you see here are members of the Global Grief Networks. And if you are a grief worker, you're looking for a place that you can feel free to talk and be around people that will support you, treat you like family and things like that, come on over and find us on Facebook. It's the Global Grief Network. The website will be coming soon. Also, as Dave mentioned, and Dee and everybody, as you've been seeing, the Global Grief Global Grief Conference is coming up April 28th to May to the 30th, and there's 3 days of live events, podcasters, workshops. Just all around great people coming to educate, give tools, and help you connect with with us in the industry, so you can get that support that you need, get the education. To actually help in your healing process. I do have a book coming up right now. I'm not at liberty to talk about it, but I do have a book coming out here in the next couple of months, as a matter of fact. So it's going to be really great. As the closer we get, I'll let you guys know where it's going to be found and what to expect. And until that time, next week. Tune in, whether if you're on Facebook, LinkedIn, or on our YouTube. Tune in. We do have more presenters coming for the Global Grief Network, and they're talking about what they're doing. They're talking about how they got into doing it and what you can expect from them at the Global Grief Conference. So we have a lot of great things coming up. And, as always, thank you for tuning in. Love you. Thank you for allowing us to support and educate you. And you guys just keep moving forward. Connect with us. All right. Peace.